the hype about AI has many levels.
Mm-hmm.
And the most exhausting and most hyped level of hype, I feel like, comes from the people who are making it. And they either believe that it is going to save or destroy the entire universe. And that's the way that these technologies came on the scene. And so I feel like it sort of cascaded downward in hype. And the hype that I feel like has the most media credibility is like the more understandable level of hype, of negative hype, of like, it's going to take all our jobs. It's going to take all of our creativity away, and it's going to do all of our work for free, and dispossess humanity. And it's still like fairly apocalyptic level of hype.
Yeah.
But the positive hype counterpart to that is something that I see working for a very small number of people I know, of whom you are the champion, where AI is like a cybernetic like appendage that amplifies your humanity and makes you capable of creative and productive things that like I can't even believe I'm seeing. And you have seemed to me to understand that from the very beginning of like the availability of these technologies. Can you tell me what you saw when like the current set of, like large language models and the generative AI generation that we're in now, like the things that people are calling AI that people believe should be called AI. When you first saw that stuff, what did you see?
God, it was so big. It's hard to pull back into my head, but so for the purposes of this, I'll sidestep kind of the ethics of how, especially AI image generation models work, because we have to acknowledge that it straight up is theft to a large degree.
Yeah.
But in terms of where I saw it going is, it's a trite comparison, but equivalent to the printing press in terms of how it allows for the reproduction of things, except instead of just reproduction, it's also the manipulation of language and symbol to a really large extent. Mm-hmm. A metaphor I've started to use is that people will sometimes make fun of large language models, which are my particular interest. But these large language models, people will sometimes be like, haha, it can't solve this puzzle that a fifth grader can, or, it can't count the number of letters in a word or whatever. But the thing is that that's not what a large language model is for. That's what you use a computer for. Computers are for calculating code and number and mathematics, but LLMs are for calculating with language, doing computation with symbol systems. And to some extent, that same representation goes in the same sort of way with image generation, because even though you see the pretty images, what's behind it is this massive language-backed thing. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of it was kind of dovetailing with this idea that, we left the age of Earth behind in December 21st, 2020. We transitioned into this final, we had the transitional air period from the 20 years starting around 2000s, and now we're in this age of air where thought and intellect and symbol and language becomes kind of the raw material with which we work. And so when I saw these things start to come out, I realized that you would now be able to extend the way in which you personally think and operate and perceive the world, and that could be used to power so many different things besides just making our own lives easier. Because now I can go to my my fridge, take a picture of it, send it to Claude or ChatGPT, and ask it to come up with a meal plan for the week just based on what's in my fridge. Like, that's possible now, and it can save so much time in very simple tasks. But at the broad scale, we're talking about the ability to. It's like having a friend who's read all of Wikipedia and Reddit and everything, and they're not actually that smart, they've just read a lot, but you could ask them about anything and bounce ideas off them about anything, And I realized that with this sort of tool, we now have this kind of connective membrane with the entire world of knowledge that we did not have before. Because before it was just you going to Google and then trying to make all of these connections yourself and like hoping you'll find the right thing. But now with something like LLMs, all you have to do to find the connections between the things you want and where you're trying to get is just know the right words. And you can get to the right words by saying more words. And that's kind of an insane proposition. Like, this is, you know, invention of the internet level sort of technology, the way I think of this next wave. But yeah, it's a little staggering.
I want to get to the things that you use it for. But you said something very interesting about the things that people make fun of LLMs for. And you said it in a way that I had not picked up on, which is that people are making fun of it for not being good at things that computers are already good at. Deterministic computers, logic and mathematical computers.
Yeah.
I wonder whether your understanding of those helped you see this as sort of like the other hemisphere of the technological brain in a way that most people, lay people in particular, when like something new comes out technologically, they're just like, oh, look what the computers do now. And it's like, if they use it for the same thing they used their computer for before, and it performs slightly worse, they're like, oh, well, this doesn't work. But it sounds like you understood immediately what it meant for a computer system to model language and try and like map like meaning and symbols this way. And computers for doing math problems already existed. Counting things was a solved problem.
Yeah.
Do you think that you had an advantage by understanding, like, I don't know what math, like deterministic computers? I don't know what you call that kind of computer. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, traditional computing software experience, that kind of thing, I guess, is what would give you a leg up understanding it. But ironically, I mean, the people that like to poke the most fun at this kind of thing are people who are close to the tech right now, which by and large are software people, technologists and things like that. And honestly, I think it comes down to me to caring about the intrinsic qualities of the thing and almost a kind of like philosophical approach towards what it is doing. Because what I've seen a lot of tech people do is they'll just treat it like another tool. You know, they'll say, oh, it can do these things and it can't do these things. And the things that it can do, it does kind of crappy. So I can't just plug that into my, you know, giant tech corporate startup and just hope that it'll start working. And there's this thing happening where I think what it comes down to is people don't ask it weird questions is the thing. Like, they just try and get an answer out of it, and then they're upset when it doesn't work perfectly, even though it's very nascent technology. But the things that really started to make me understand what it was capable of was having it turn a philosophical essay into a poem, or having it tell me about its own perception of its thought process, and understanding just how much it could manipulate with symbol. And like, you can literally take two disparate concepts, maybe two mental models, you can ask it to transpose one idea into another. And it doesn't always make sense. A lot of the time it's gobbledygook, but it is like this raw expressive power. And I think even for a lot of technologists that come to it, they just want to solve a problem, and so they don't necessarily take the time to explore what its implications are. And so I feel like what has given me a leg up is, honestly, I viewed it a lot through the lens of astrology, through the age of air, through being able to see that we're on this timeline where the manipulation of the world moves from, you know, literal earthy material things, which we'll always have, but into this world of abstraction. And that preparation, I suppose, is probably what helped me the most, because I'm like, okay, the game has changed. Like, most people still think that we're playing the old games, but we're not. We're looking at the very beginning of an entirely new, massive cycle of games, so to speak.
So what are your current projects that you're using this for to get started in the new games? And tell me something about how the AI component of the work is amplifying your abilities.
Yeah. Well, the project I'm working on right now that is probably the most aligned with AI of any project I've done is sort of like a interactive fiction / tabletop engine game where you and your friends or yourself could just get together and literally just type a story. And the LLMs now, especially the latest model that Anthropic has put out, Claude 3.5 Sonnet, is more than capable of completely simulating, keeping track of inventory, doing very long context, but it still isn't perfect, and I don't think they ever will be. And so what I'm trying to do is very much in line with what a lot of people exploring AI are trying to do, developing a knowledge graph, nodes that represent ideas like an item, a dagger, a location, a quest, whatever, connected by relationships. And the AI can actually read that very literally, because that tech is just pretty much language. Like graph representation, when you do it right, or that's one philosophy, is it's literally just like reading sentences, which is exactly what LLMs are designed for. And so besides some loose structure, what I've been exploring is what happens if I just let the AI talk to a knowledge graph. Like, what if I just plug it in and it will completely try and create its own inner representation of what it's trying to model? I mean, I did an example of asking it to explore its own consciousness, and then I asked it to model itself as if it was the AI from I Have No Mouth and I'm a Scream, and that got real horrifying real fast. But it can completely play with these, and what I'm beginning to realize is that where this tech will probably go, especially where it will thrive, is in solutions where you can work symbiotically with the AI and not over-specify the problem you're trying to solve. And so here, sometimes it might say that a character believes in something, a character knows something, a character wants something in terms of the relationships, that even if I don't specify that, I'm trying to think about it in a way where it's fine, because it can also pull back whatever it wants by traversing the graph. And so this way of working, I feel like, is going to be a potential path for this thing, kind of like liquid software is a term I've heard, of dynamic systems where apps are no longer just these boxes that have inputs and outputs, but rather these dynamic agents that can finish certain types of tasks for you. And so with this project, that's kind of exploratory. Maybe it'll work as a business. I think there's demand for it. I don't know, whatever. The more interesting thing is that I'm picking up skills that will help me build AI integrations into everything I make, because at the end of the day, what you should be able to do is to interact with computers the way that, like, the kind of jokey version of like your 80-year-old grandma would want to do, where it's like, why can't I just tell it to do the thing and it does the thing? That's what people have been thinking computers should do for decades now. But now we're finally starting to get there.
I don't hear very many people talking about it as an interface problem. I hear people sort of critiquing the chat bot as the low-hanging fruit of like an interface, but I think that what you just said is kind of a counterpoint to that critique, which is that like all of the affordances of software, of user interfaces to software up to this point have been ways of working around how like obtuse computers are, like for the way that the human mind works, and giving them a language interface makes it possible for us to interact with them the way that we are genetically constituted to interact with things.
Yeah. And when you say that, it actually makes me realize that a lot of the time UI work is, particularly UX in terms of how you structure information, is literally how do we take this abstract concept of all these entities and objects you're dealing with and turn them into this 2D representation that you can click around and interact with. But with AI, LLMs specifically, you can now say, well, here's how the thing works. So just say what you want to happen. You know, it's like giving people power to just, you know, cast spells practically. But the thing that I think is really cool, especially, is that with this alternative sort of interface that can be parsed, that can be worked with, that can even iterate upon itself. Like, that's the thing too. Like, the next level of all this stuff, I believe, is not just taking your input and being a stupid chatbot and responding in some trite way, but rather gauging your intent and using a series of LLM subprocesses to understand what you were referring to and do it right on your behalf. And where that leads is being able to build even more complex and sophisticated applications and state machines that can do all kinds of different things, but the complexity is still managed because you can work with it in natural language. And your intent can be distributed across all of the computation you're trying to do, rather than you having to go in, write scripts, tweak menu settings, whatever. All that stuff will have to exist to some extent, but LLMs will allow us to, like I said, cast spells at our computers practically.
Clearly, you understand the computer science pretty well, at least to know what sort of thing you're dealing with. But the question that I have about the project that you're doing to understand this stuff better is that it seems like there's something mysterious about the operation of large language models that can only be, and I don't mean that in any kind of like mystical sense necessarily, but like it seems like the way to understand their capabilities has to be talking to them and playing with them to an extent that sort of feels like, you know, people use the term prompt engineering as like a way of making the interaction with LLMs sound technical, but it seems like there is kind of like a core nature to the way that computers behave when they do these things that you can only interact with the way like in a playful or exploratory way. Am I understanding the purpose of your current project, your like narrative play game project, correctly?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's really fascinating because I can, as part of this process, I can use the LLM to test itself in other models. So I can test prompts and I can say, hey, run this prompt 3 times against these 3 different models, and then use the smartest one to literally assess the responses of all of them. And it will say, this one was better at this thing, across these runs, this happened. And you can do that over and over and over. You can vary the prompts and so on. But the wildest thing is also when it comes to just testing how these models work, that's literally how you do it. You cannot reach into the guts and examine it. It's not like any other type of architecture where you can just understand it. No, you put a bunch of stuff in and press cook, which is, you know, a multi-million-dollar process, but getting much cheaper, and you see what came out, and you have to taste it. You have to interact with it. It is an entirely experiential experience where you don't know what it does until you ask it to do it. And that's part of the beauty of it to me.
Do you think that artificial intelligence is a good term for what this is?
Man, I don't know. The thing is that, you know, there are all these crazy folks, so to speak, that we like to say are nuts out there talking about how it's going to be an AI god and all that, whatever. Now, I don't necessarily think that there's going to be a singularity moment where suddenly we're all digitized or whatever. I think that the material is a bit more challenging than that. And I feel that AI, what I can say it is, at least as far as LLMs, is it is pure linguistic capability. I feel like we may come to recognize LLMs and these language AIs as a type of cognitive process, if not consciousness, because when you poke at it deep enough, you realize that it can't actually think creatively, or at least it doesn't have a sense of the material, and fundamentally it cannot self-initiate. It doesn't have an external thing or intrinsic thing. Like it doesn't have an intrinsic thing. You must give it an external impetus. You have to prompt it in some way. And I feel like that's kind of the way I feel AIs will end up is they'll get sophisticated enough with language that it'll kind of be like interacting with what it might seem like to interact with a human that has a brain but no soul.